Hello and welcome to the Native Shrubs for the Home Landscape. It's for the Birds webinar. I'm Kevin Rohling. I'm a forestry research technician with University of Illinois Extension Forestry at Dixon Springs Agricultural Center in Southern Illinois. So before we get into some of the native shrubs that we're going to talk about today, I wanted to go over some of the things you might want to consider before making your selections. So depending on the plant you choose, they might have specific requirements for the climate, soils, degree of sun and shade, and soil moisture, texture, acidity, that sort of thing. And we'll talk about some ways that you can make those decisions. Um, in addition, we have, personal preferences in terms of where you're going to place the plants, borders, accents, focal areas, the attractiveness, the flowers and the foliage. And really what the thrust of this presentation is about is the wildlife value. What are the insects, birds, and other wildlife that are going to be able to make use of these plants? For insects and birds, we're looking at food and cover resources, um, nectar and pollen, vegetation, a whole suite of values that wildlife can make use of in these plants. The first thing I wanted to mention here is the climate. So, of course, excuse me, Illinois is a long state north to south, and so we have a pretty variable climate across that distance. So you just want to make sure whichever plants you end up choosing, that they will be able to thrive in your climatic zone. 'Cause if you think about it, deep down in southernmost Illinois, where I am, we're actually on the same latitude as central Kentucky, whereas northern Illinois, the climate is more similar to, say, Wisconsin or Michigan even. So just something to keep in mind. A lot of the species that I'll talk about today will have some degree of variability. Others are more specific, so just want to watch out for that. In terms of the soils, excuse me, one of the easiest things you can do in terms of getting an idea of what kind of soil you might be working with at your site is to use the web soil survey. So this is an online resource um, managed by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. Um, so if you're wanting to try this out, you just go to this web page, click on the Start WSS button, as you see there on this cutout of the page, and from there you will generate a report, and that will feed you the soil types that are present on your site. And with that information, you can then go to the soil series information website that I've listed second there, and that will give you information on the characteristics of the soils that are going to be present at your site. So just as an example, here's a site in Marion, Illinois, where I drew an area of interest around our yard, and it shows that there's actually only one soil type. So this number 376A is the soil type for the entirety of the yard. if there were different soil types, there would be lines demarcating the shift in the different soil type. So within this report, you can find this 376A corresponds to a Sisney silt loam. So there I found out that my soil type is a silt loam. So that's something that you might want to consider once we get into these different species. And so with that information, when you go to that second website that talks about the soil series descriptions, you look up the Sisney series, and here's the information that you get from that second website. And I kind of circled some of the key information that I thought was relevant to our purposes. So you have here, it states that it is a poorly drained, slowly or very slowly permeable soils. So that might be something you want to consider depending on the requirements of the plants that you choose. And then when you go down and look at the different layers of the soil, you find the topmost layer is moderately acidic. And then as you go further into the soil, it is strongly acidic. So you might want to choose plants that can handle some acidity. And then another point that is often mentioned in these series descriptions are the use and vegetation. So currently, most of these areas are agricultural, growing corn, soybeans, and wheat. But a lot of times they'll have this historic vegetation here. So the native vegetation was prairie grass with some widely spaced trees in places. So that gives me some sort of idea of what types of plants might be adaptable to my site. And I think that's a good way to get a broad idea of what you might aim for in your native landscaping. So just to get into a little bit about the difference in natives versus non-natives, and some of the key differences are in the use of native wildlife. So non-natives, not all of them are invasive, and some of them are just fine to have in your yard. They're not going to escape some of them. Well, most of them actually. But some of them do become invasive, and we definitely want to avoid the invasive ones. And, um, when you're choosing new plants, I highly encourage you to choose natives because they're going to have the most wildlife value. Non-native plants just haven't co-evolved with the native animals and insects, so they don't really provide as many resources that are used by native insects and songbirds and other wildlife. So when we're looking at native shrubs, we're mostly looking at um, we're looking at what those plants can provide for the local wildlife. So nectar and pollen resources, nesting sites, cover, places to hide, um, food such as the berries, seeds, nuts, the vegetation itself, stems, and the insects. So when we're talking about the use of native plants by insects, um, it's important not only for the insects themselves, but also the birds that are going to be feeding on those, especially caterpillars and things like that. Even the seed-eating songbirds are going to need to make use of local insects and caterpillars to feed their young when they're nesting. Um, so with this all in mind, we, if you're thinking of your landscaping as a more traditional type, we really might need to reframe how you think of pests because in a lot of cases, what might be considered a pest on your shrub is actually beneficial to a lot of songbirds that are going to be making use of that as food. So, just something to consider. And I found this web page, Native Plant Finder. This was extremely useful to identifying native plants that are local to your area. So you can actually put in your specific zip code and um, it will generate lists of the native plants that you could use in your landscaping. And then, in addition to that list of native plants, it actually generates the number of butterflies and moths that those plants are host to. So it's really pretty neat. If you look at I this is just a cutout of the website using my zip code here in Marion, 62959, and if you kind of scroll through it, it'll give you these lists of trees and shrubs, flowers and grasses, and so on. But it also shows here the number of butterflies and moths from each species, or in some cases, they are looking at the genus, so a whole group of species in the same genus. For example, here, the greatest number of support for these butterflies and moths are the oaks as a genus, Quercus. So that's 456 different butterflies and moth species are making use of oak uh, in our area. So that's pretty cool. Whoops. So with that, we're gonna just jump right into some of these species descriptions. So the downy serviceberry. This is a multi-stem shrub or small tree, can be about 10 to 30 feet depending on conditions. It is an early spring bloomer, um, called serviceberry because in the early pioneer days, when the ground is frozen over the winter, people were not able to bury people who had passed away over the winter until the ground thawed. And so folks knew that the ground was going to be thawed enough at the same time that the serviceberry was blooming. So, kind of an interesting little story about that one. It is best in partial shade and can be stressed in full sun, so you want to avoid that. Prefers well drained, slightly alkaline to acidic loam or sand. Really nice bloom, just great little flowers, attracts a lot of things here. Um, so it is host to 91 species of butterflies and moths, so pretty significant. A couple examples here, the striped hair streak in the top right and the red spotted purple just below, and several moths, in addition to quite a few bees, flies, and beetles that are going to be nectaring and using that plant. There are over 30 bird species that feed on the berries, including here we have the eastern bluebird, uh, red-bellied woodpecker, and downy woodpecker, among others. Up next, we have the wild hydrangea. This is 3 to 8 foot tall. Has these really cool panicles of flowers that are 3 to 6 inches wide across. Really interesting bloom. They prefer dappled sunlight to light shade and consistently damp, moderately acidic to neutral soil with some organic matter mixed in. These are a little more specific in their needs than a lot of the other ones that I'm talking about today, so you want to take that into consideration. Um, they do prefer humid areas with some protection from wind as well. Some of the things that are supported by hydrangea, it is host to 10 species of butterflies and moths. The hydrangea sphinx and hydrangea leaf tear moth are a couple that are specific to hydrangeas. Some of the insects that use the nectar and pollen, we have an image here of the Dalla torre small carpenter bee. So lots of little smaller bees and flies, um, different beetles, syrphid, dance flies, thick-headed flies. A lot of different things are going to make use of the wild hydrangea. Up next, we have one of my favorites, the common elderberry. So this one is pretty adaptable, grows from 4 to 12 feet in height, can tolerate full to partial sun, moist and fertile loamy soil, but it is quite adaptable. It is short-lived, but it's clonal, so in some cases where the stems die back, you'll have new growth adjacent to those dead and dying stems. And if you're able to tolerate it, those dead stems provide habitat for some bee species to nest in those hollow stems. So you can, of course, cut them back if it's something that you don't like aesthetically, but that is providing some habitat for bees. It has really nice spring blooms, as you see here in the picture, really attractive foliage, um, and fall berries that are really bold, bright, deep purple in color that a lot of wildlife like to use. So it is host to 29 butterflies and moths, not too shabby. It provides nesting options for little carpenter bees and mason bees that tunnel into the pith. It is a pollen and vegetation resource for a number of other insects, such as the elderberry longhorn, pictured there on the bottom left, and elder aphids, pictured there on the right, and a whole suite of honeybees, other types of bees. We have pictured here on the top a bee fly, one of my favorite insects. Just really kind of interesting looking creatures that are going to be able to make use of this. In addition, we have over 30 species of birds that'll eat the berries, and I enjoyed this quote from exploringbirds.com. One of the best bird attracting plants in all of North America. So not only are birds going to make use of the elderberry for the insects as food, they'll also use the berries and the foliage for cover. Um, just a really great all-around plant. And the fact that it's environmentally adaptable makes this a good choice for beginners as well. So the brown thrasher uh, is pictured here on the bottom left, and the rose-breasted grosbeak, just a couple of those many birds that are going to make use of this. In addition to the birds, we also have some mammals and reptiles that are going to potentially make use of those fruits. So fox squirrel, box turtles, eastern mud turtle, even a semi-aquatic turtle. Pretty cool. And a lot of things are going to be able to use this. Up next, we have the buttonbush. So this is um, a shrub that grows 3 to 8 foot tall, enjoys full to partial sun, and wet to moist, fertile, high organic content soil. This would be a really good choice if you're considering a rain garden. Has these really cool blooms, as you see pictured there. Just these spherical balls with uh, projectiles coming out, and those spheres are retained over the winter, so it gives it some winter interest as well. And I have seen it in somewhat more music conditions, so not totally limited to wet areas, but it would prefer that. Um, so might be an option for you depending on your site. Um, this is host to 24 butterflies and moths, including this beautiful wood nymph there on the top right and the buckeye on the bottom right. Uh, the beautiful wood nymph, interestingly enough, it it actually is pretty cool looking, but I did see that some folks believe it is imitating a piece of bird poo in order to avoid detection by predators. So beautiful, yes, but also an interesting defense mechanism there. Buttonbush is also used by a number of honeybees, bumblebees, cuckoo bees, longhorn bees, leaf-cutting bees, a whole suite of wasps and flies, and also some beetles and bugs, such as the clouded plant bug there in the bottom left. So a lot of different things are going to be able to make use of the buttonbush. In addition, it is a nectar resource for the ruby-throated hummingbird and can be nesting habitat for a couple of wetland species, but it can be poisonous to livestock. So, in case you might have that in your area, something to be aware of. But beavers and white-tailed deer must be immune because they are known to eat it on occasion. Up next, we have another of my favorites, the false indigo. This is a 4 to 16-foot tall shrub. Also prefers full or partial sun and wet to moist conditions. Again, this one is does prefer a wetter site, but I have seen it in some fairly dry, more upland sites as well, so it can do all right in those sorts of areas as well. Has this dense flower arrangement as you see here, and really interesting bloom, really, and the foliage is very attractive in my opinion as well. If you're familiar with the smaller lead plant, it's more of a prairie forb, not quite a shrub, but semi-woody plant. This is a cousin of the lead plant, and people have described it as a lead plant on steroids because of its increased height and size. So kind of fun. The false indigo is host to 35 species of butterflies and moths, including um, um, the silver-spotted skipper, dog-faced sulfur, black-spotted prominent, and common tan wave. And a number of bees are going to make use of this as well, such as the halactid. We have a picture here of a masked bee and a number of others there as well. Birds, so the birds are that are gonna use the seeds in particular include the small seed-eating songbirds, so things like the goldfinch, this white-crowned sparrow we have pictured here, and other sparrows, tufted titmice, and juncos as pictured there in the bottom right. Up next, we have the fragrant sumac. This one prefers full or partial sun, dry, sandy, or rocky soils, or mesic with fertile, loamy soil. So this one is pretty adaptable to different conditions. It can be 2 to 8 feet tall. And one of the benefits of this one is that it has a lovely smell to it, hence the name fragrant sumac. So if you crush one of the leaves in your hand, has this really nice kind of citrusy odor. It is smaller and less aggressive than some of its relatives, the smooth sumac and staghorn sumac, so you might not have as many issues with it trying to spread out as much as those other plants. So I should mention here as well, this is the host to 49 species of butterflies and moths, but that includes all of the roost genus according to the Plant Finder website. So these may or may not make use of the fragrant sumac in particular. They may be uh, using some of the other native sumacs. Just something to keep in mind. So here we have a couple of interesting Lepidoptera here, the spring azure, one of our early spring butterflies, and a regal moth, just a really cool looking large moth that makes use of the fragrant sumac. Um, uh, and then also, a lot of birds will use it, although it is not a favored food source. Um, so some of our more generalist species will make use of it when there's little else available, such as the crow, catbirds, pictured on the top there, and of course the ubiquitous robin in the bottom left. Other birds include thrashers and bluebirds and some others as well. White-tailed deer and cottontail rabbits will make use of the stems and leaves as well, so you might need to watch out for that if that's something you want to avoid. Up next, we have the spice bush. It can be 5 to 15 feet tall, prefers dappled sunlight to medium shade, moist to mesic, and fertile loamy soil with organic matter. Although I've seen it in quite a few different areas, so it is somewhat adaptable. It smells really good. Again, this is one similar to the fragrant sumac. If you crush a leaf, it has more of a citrus, kind of a citrusy smell, but a little more fruity. You can use it to make a tea, actually. And I did find online where someone was using it to basically infuse the taste of spicebush into their ice cream. So they kind of made a tea and then added that flavor into their ice cream. Sounds kind of fun. Haven't tried it myself, but maybe one of these days. So Spicebush is host to 10 species of butterflies and moths, most famously perhaps the Spicebush swallowtail. Pictured here, we have the Spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. Really interesting defense mechanism with those fake large eye spots um, in order to try to fool predators into thinking it's a much larger creature than it actually is, and that the predator may not want to go after it. So that's a really neat one. And then also another large Lepidoptera here, the Prometheus silk moth, will make use of the spice bush as well. Really cool insects here as well. So the fruits of spice bush are also eaten by birds, including some pretty fun ones here. The bob white, great crested flycatcher, pictured there on the right. Eastern kingbird, pictured on the top left. The veery, hermit thrush, Swainson's thrush, and red-eyed vireo, among others. One of the thrushes there on the bottom. The rough-leaved dogwood is up next. This can be a shrub or a small tree up to 20 feet. It prefers partial sun and moist to slightly dry loam, clay loam, or rocky soils, so it's pretty adaptable. Pretty cool looking berries there. Nice spring bloom. So Cornus as a genus, there are quite a few native dogwoods, so there are a lot of dogwood options out there. And this genus is another one that supports a lot of different butterflies and moths, so 102 species in my area. And I just picked one that I thought was kind of interesting, the funerary dagger moth. Just a pretty wild looking caterpillar there. Uh, the dagger moth is so called because of those projectiles coming out of the side of the body there. And then funerary, just because of the color scheme. As an adult, it is also a black and white moth. So pretty neat. Also attracts a lot of different pollinators, such as honeybees, bumblebees, a number of the smaller bees that we've been mentioning throughout. We have pictured here a cuckoo bee, a hylaeus bee, and an andronid bee, just as examples. Also can attract predatory wasps going after those bees, I assume, and also probably some beetles and bugs as well. Flies, different native flies, butterflies, skippers, and beetles. Over 20 birds will feed on the fruits of the rough-leaved dogwood, including things like the bobwhite again, wild turkey, purple finch, pictured here, and the pine warbler, pictured there on the bottom right. Up next, we have the devil's walking stick. This one I thought was kind of interesting that people would decide to choose this plant for their landscaping, but after I thought about it, it does have some pretty unique characteristics to it. So I could see people wanting to use it as sort of a curiosity in their landscaping if they had an appropriate site. It has these spines growing off of the stems, hence the common name devil's walking stick. And then has these really enormous compound leaves that can be 2 to 4 foot long and 1 to 3.5 foot across. And that's a single leaf there pictured in the bottom right. It is doubly compound, so each of those smaller um, leaves are actually leaflets composing a much larger single leaf. It prefers partial sun, moist music, and loamy soil, and it can adapt to rocky, clay, or sandy soil with a wide pH tolerance, so it's somewhat adaptable. The if you do consider this plant, it might be good to know that the flowers and berries might not be produced until the third or fourth year or even later. It just takes a while for this plant to reach that maturity level. And only two butterflies and moths will use it as a host plant. But I will say when I come across it blooming in the forest anyway, it's usually almost always a frenzy of activity being used by so many different insects as a pollen and nectar resource. And then the abundant berries are eaten by a variety of birds. Um, we have the white-throated sparrow pictured here on the top left. And then I threw in a couple of mammals here. In the right spot, you might actually get the black bear or eastern chipmunk making use of the devil's walking stick. And then white-tailed deer will also browse the foliage. Up next, we have the black haw viburnum. So this is a shrub or small tree growing up to 15 feet. Prefers light shade to partial sun and mesic to dry, loamy, clay loam, sandy loam, or somewhat rocky soils. So a pretty wide range of soils. It blooms mid to late spring. Has really nice flowers as you see there, and I think some attractive foliage as well. There are quite a few native viburnums out there. This is kind of one of the more popular ones, so that's why I chose it. It is, viburnums as a genus are host to 91 butterflies and moths. I selected here the snowberry clearwing. This is a moth actually. The moth is imitating the color pattern of a bee or wasp in order to deter predators from going after it again. So another cool defense mechanism by one of these insects, and that's actually its caterpillar there on the bottom. Um, the viburnums also will attract a number of bees and native flies as well, and skippers and butterflies, hummingbird moths, and even ants. So a lot of things are going to make use of this black haw. Up next, we have another one of my favorites, the Hartzebuston, Euonymus americanus. And this one has a lot of different common names if you look it up. So this one is important to look at the scientific name, Euonymus americanus, because not only are there a suite of common names, there are also a number of non-native invasive plants that are in the same genus, and so you need to be careful with the euonymus. But this one is a 6 to 12-foot shrub, has ridged twigs that are purplish looking in the sun, has these pale green flowers in the bottom right, but that's not really the most attractive feature. The real show here is these bright red fruits and orange seeds that are just so interesting looking. This one prefers light shade and moist soil, but it may tolerate up to full shade. And typically I do see it in rather shady conditions. I just wanted to share with you, I came across this while I was doing some looking online, and this advertisement for selling strawberry bush or hearts of bustin was calling it deer candy, aka ice cream plant for deer. So if you have a deer issue, you may want to be prepared to fence this off or make a different selection because it is a preferred food source for deer. Also listed here, they have a number of the different common names. Brook euonymus I liked as well because I often see it along streams, and bursting heart, as well as the hearts of bustin or hearts of burstin. And then also the wahoo, which is another common name that's used for a number of different euonymus species. So you want to be careful about that. Hearts of bustin. So again, this one is host to 14 species of butterflies and moths. A number of them listed here, but pictured we have the white-marked tussock moth. Um, in addition to the current clearwing, plebeian sphinx, and many more. The berries themselves will be eaten by northern flickers, brown thrashers, catbirds, eastern bluebirds, cardinals, and pictured here, one of my favorites, the eastern towhee. Pretty cool small bird there that doesn't often like to get its picture taken. Nine bark is the next one here. This one can be 3 to 9 feet tall, prefers full to partial sunlight, moist to dry, and loamy, sandy, or rocky soil, but it is adaptable to various conditions. It provides a whole suite of nectar, pollen, and seed resources to local wildlife. So pretty good one here. It is host to 30 species of butterflies and moths. Here we have pictured a caterpillar of the Io moth, but also host to blinded sphinx, Cecropius silk moth, specific to the nine bark pygmy moth, raspberry leaf roller, and unicorn caterpillar, among others. Up next, another really great resource for wildlife, the American hazelnut, and I think a pretty interesting plant on its own. This one is 4 to 15 feet tall, grows in full sun to light shade, moist to dry mesic, and loamy, sandy, or rocky soil. This one is quite adaptable to different conditions, and it has a high wildlife value. Insects, birds, and mammals will all make use of it. So pictured here, we have the top is the nuts inside their husks before they cure and kind of open up. And bottom left, we have the male flower parts, the catkins that form over the winter, so they give it some winter interest as well. And then on the bottom right, you see one of the husks opened up and one of the hazelnuts peeking out. Looks kind of like a small acorn. The hazelnut is host to a lot of different butterflies and moths, 113 species. Picked out one here, the royal walnut moth, aka the hickory horned devil. Pretty wild looking creature there, both in the larval stage and as an adult. So that's an interesting one. The nuts are used by a whole host of things, including the bob white, wild turkey, greater prairie chicken in the right spot. Only a couple of small areas left here in Illinois with the greater prairie chicken. The red-bellied woodpecker and the blue jay, pictured here. And the catkins and buds can provide food for different things over the winter. It's used by several mammals in addition to birds. The beavers will eat the stems and use them to construct lodges if they're in a wet area. And it provides cover and ideal nesting habitat for a lot of different songbirds as well. So we're getting closer to the end here, but I wanted to bring up a point. If you're looking for evergreen shrubs, native evergreen shrubs are kind of hard to come by in Illinois. In northern Illinois, we have the Canada yew, and there are some non-native yews out there as well, but all of these are toxic, so you want to be aware of that. Some evergreen shrubs that are native to nearby regions include the mountain laurel and the inkberry. Those might be possibilities. And then I just wanted to offer up some other possible evergreen options that are out there that aren't necessarily shrubs. So we have the giant reed, Arundinaria gigantea, or our, otherwise known as our native cane, native bamboo. Be careful not to select the invasive Arundodonax or any of the non-native bamboos because a lot of those can become invasive. You want to make sure you're getting the native option. So that could be a good screen option for if that's something you're looking for. The eastern red cedar, of course, pictured in the top right. This is a fairly large tree at maturity. Another tree, the shortleaf pine, is native to some parts of Illinois, and the tamarack tree up north. American holly, similarly, can be a good sized tree at maturity, but it is kind of native to our southeast. Um, might be a good option for you. And then finally, I have listed here the Christmas fern. If you're just interested in having some green foliage throughout the year, that might be a good option for it. Some of the things you want to be aware of. So, a lot of non native plants are heavily promoted. So, some of the invasives that are still being sold include the burning bush and Callery pear. The Callery pear is sold under many varieties, such as the Bradford pear, Aristocat, Crat, um, um, Cleveland Select, a couple of the other, um, pretty much any ornamental pear that you're going to find out there is most likely a version of the Callery pear. So you want to avoid those if at all possible. One that is can be invasive farther south of us, and I've actually seen it starting to escape from folks' landscape here in southern Illinois, is the leatherleaf mahonia. Similarly, the heavenly bamboo or nandina is invasive in more southern states, but I've seen it planted here in a lot of landscapes, and I'm pretty concerned about that one becoming a problem here in the future. And then Japanese barberry is all across the state, and it's another one that you you would want to avoid. It can be highly invasive in our natural areas. Another thing to consider, some species are sold under one name may actually be a different invasive species. There was a study recently that came out that found that 54% of the plants that were labeled as American bittersweet were actually the non-native invasive Oriental bittersweet. And, so um, not to excuse them, but it can be difficult to tell the two apart, especially when the plants are younger. As they become more mature and actually flower, that's when you really can tell the difference between those. So if you do end up going for bittersweet, just keep an eye on it and uh, look up those differences and make sure what you have is the American bittersweet. And then finally, some invasive species can have similar names and or be in the same genus as native species. So as I mentioned earlier, the burning bush is an invasive plant that we want to avoid planting versus the strawberry bush or hearts of buston. They're both in the same genus, Euonymus. So you just want to make sure what you're getting is the correct native plant that you want to have and not the other. So with that, I'll close here with some citations from that have a lot of additional information related to what we've discussed today. There are a lot of really good native plant options out there, not just what I have reviewed. So I encourage you to go to Native Plant Finder, put in your zip code, and see what they have listed there. And some of these other websites have some really great information. Illinois Wildflowers has a lot of information about um, what the preferences are for these native shrubs. So if you find one that you're considering, go look it up on this Illinois Wildflowers website, and you'll get a lot of good information. And then a couple other resources for ideas for landscape alternatives to invasive plants. And then finally, I relisted here the web soil survey and the soil series information. So this is a re-recording of the original webinar. I goofed up, so I'm gonna try and answer a couple of the questions that I can recall. Someone asked that what might be some smaller, shorter statured options for smaller yards. Um, Depending on your site, you might think of things like New Jersey tea or even some forbs like maybe not necessarily the false indigo, but maybe its shorter cousin, the lead plant. Um, Or another thing I mentioned would be choosing shrubs that don't mind being cut back each year. That way you can kind of maintain their smaller size. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot of other options out there that you can look up as well. Somebody also asked about chokeberry. Again, there's a lot of different native options. Chokeberry would also be a really good option that is native to parts of Illinois and has a lot of wildlife value. Um, what else was there? Someone asked about shady plants that grow better in the shade. I would say the euonymus, the hearts of buston, or another native euonymus that would be good is the eastern wahoo. Both of those do all right in the shade. Another question was what grows well under walnuts, and um, that is kind of tricky sometimes. Um, the hazelnut and elderberry both are known to tolerate those soil conditions under walnuts, so those might be a couple you look into. A couple of folks asked about climate change and how that might be influencing native vegetation. Um, pretty typical, what you might expect. Um, if the native plants are more adapted to colder areas, they're going to have to move farther north or they'll die out. Um, some of the plants that we talked about today are pretty generalist species. They're able to tolerate a pretty wide range of temperatures and climate. So those types of plants are probably not going to be impacted as much as plants that have less heat tolerance. So with that, I believe we will wrap it up. And thank you for watching. If you came across this somewhere else, please check out our Illinois Extension Forestry YouTube channel for more information and more webinars and other videos. Thanks again.